him later in the film, and he has a conversation with him. And Orson Welles has one famous line in the movie where he goes over his philosophy and he reveals that he goes, I don't understand. Like, we used to be friends. How have you changed? Because they learned that, like, I think he's selling bad medicine to sick children or something. So something really horrible, right? Like, and he just doesn't give a shit, you know. And he goes, I don't understand, like, how you became this sort of person, you know. And then he goes, don't you believe in God? He goes, I thought you used to believe in God. And he goes, I do believe in God. He's like, I don't think that God really cares. He goes, or something like that, you know. And then he says, you know, he goes, the Italians had fascism, empires, wars. He goes, and what did they invent? And he goes, or they had fascism, armies, wars. And what did they create? The Roman Empire. He goes, the Swiss had democracy, freedom. And what did they invent? The cuckoo clock. Goodbye. And then he walks off.
I dig it. Welcome
great
to
line.
this. It is. Welcome to the Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with Anthony Marchetta. I apologize for the weirdness of the stream. The streaming equipment is fighting me, so I will not be restreaming it out through Discord, sadly. I want to thank you all for joining.
Plus, I'm on the road.
Plus, he's on the road. That's the main thing, really. Today we're talking about comedy.
Yeah, and this is also as kind of an excuse to talk about, you know, like how art works in general, because there are some connections here that we can make. And theory of comedy. So I was discussing this with Ben, like, I'm gonna basically what we're here to or why I wanted to do the stream is, first off, there are different types of comedy about different things and like with different styles, but also I wanted to push back against a very common idea. So we here at Superversive Sci-Fi are strong believers in the concept of objective quality, right? I agree with J.D. Cohen's definition. Art is, by definition, work that is created to a standard, right? If a work is created to a standard, it is art. If there is no standard, it is, by definition, not art. I had a very interesting conversation with my sister about this, because I was talking about, like, and Ben, you might be interested somewhat in this. I was watching Neil Illustrator, who is an animatic creator, do an interview with a couple of creators about one of her things. And she said that after she created a animatic of the song Get in the Water from Epic the Musical, she said she got a lot of backlash for it. Now, and she goes, people didn't like Poseidon's design. She said at first. And she was discussing, like, people would say, like, they didn't like it, and they told her that they wanted her to change it or whatever. And then one of the people she was interviewing, like, looked at the audience and said, if you're telling an artist how to, with the gay voice, if you're telling an artist how to change their work, you are engaging with the community wrong. Yeah, I don't agree with that at all. I fundamentally disagree with it. And I also don't really respect Neil's reaction to it, to be honest with you. Now, for one thing, her Get in the Water animatic, which you've seen, it's an excellent animatic, but there is something off about Poseidon's face in it. Like, that was the first thing you noticed about it, right? Like, that Poseidon's face was kind of off. Does that make it a bad animatic? No, not at all. It's a brilliant animatic, actually. Like, it's one of the best. And deservedly so. Like, it has its reputation. It earned its reputation. The fact that mild criticisms of one character design almost put her off from making new animatics makes me go, like, really? You're that thin-skinned? Like, you get almost universal praise, but very mild criticism of a part of your character design nearly made you give up. Like, okay. But second, this idea that when you release a work into the world, you shouldn't expect any criticism of it. right? Like you're
Right.
engaging with the community wrong if you criticize it. I don't agree with that. Obviously, there is a right way and a wrong way of doing it. There is a right way and a wrong way of doing anything, right? There's a moral and immoral way. But to say that you can't criticize, say my work is not up to any standard that I will accept but my own, right? Like there is no standard that I want my work judged against, which means you are not creating art. You're not an artist. And my sister mentioned, she goes, I do think there are times where this is appropriate. Like occasionally people will release like fan fictions. They would go, please don't judge it. I just made it for fun. But then my sister said, but what that means is they did not create art, right? Definitionally. They said it's fine if that's what they're doing, as long as they acknowledge and you acknowledge, right? What I have just released into the world is by definition not art, because there is no standard it is being judged against. So I don't agree with that at all. I think good faith criticisms, when leveled without malice, right, are perfectly legitimate.
Right.
And that includes of Pinkerton's Ghosts. That includes of anything. You are allowed to make good faith criticisms. That obviously Neil is not obligated to listen to those criticisms, nor is it necessarily true that those criticisms are correct. But they are certainly permitted, and nobody should be shamed into, the way that the live stream guy put it, like, telling someone what to do. Like, yeah, of course I'm telling you what to do. I am telling you that according to standards of good art, this fell short in this way. If you want to make good art, this is what you have to do to fix it, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. You could tell me I'm wrong, too. That's also not rude, by the way. As long as you don't do it in a malicious way. Like, harassment is one thing. You see this all the time, and I know I'm on a little tangent here, but this is kind of important, and it is related to what we're talking about in more ways than you think, right? Like, you see this sort of attitude all the time, and it really bothers me. Like, you can't criticize this, or it's somehow you're being rude, right?
Right.
Aster did this, so we did the whole stream on, like, Aster. You see it with movie. Hollywood loves to claim this. Anytime anyone criticizes anything about a Hollywood movie, trolls are harassing me. No, they just said your movie was shit. Like, it's gonna happen, right? Like, and I understand that there's insecure in people like, oh, one negative comment ruins it, even with 100 positive, one negative ruins my day. But to be frank, get over it, right? Like, if you're really that thin-skinned, it's not my fault, Like, you need to learn how to accept criticism. Esther did this when she did her Epic the Musical review. She was like, people harassed me. Nobody harassed her. Literally nobody harassed her, right?
No, people.
What they did was they wanted to stream. Yeah, what they did was they watched the stream and they said, "What the hell? This is shit." Like, it's like, hey, Aster, your stream is really bad. You were a jerk to Jorge, and your criticisms were stupid. And she goes, whoa, a bunch of Epic fans came in because they have a parasocial relationship with Jorge. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? Like, I don't have a parasocial relationship with anyone. I just think that your stream was dumb. And it's the same attitude, right? Like, you can't accept criticism. There is no any criticism that I give, right? Like, I'm protected from anything because any sort of response is harassment. No, criticism, for the record, criticism is a form of art as well. It should be held to a standard. The standard is the same standard that the art is held to. Your criticism needs to be based on what makes artwork good, right?
Right.
Which makes criticism a form of art. And it absolutely is. And if you don't believe it, read G.K. Chesterton, who is a masterful critic. Read Tom Simon. Read some of John C. Wright's reviews. All excellent critics, right? If you don't think that criticism can be an art form. It is. And it's an art form because it's work produced to a standard, just like anything else. The standard is the same standard the art is judged on, which is that you are saying there are objective qualities that make a work good. It hits these qualities here, it doesn't hit them here. And if you are wrong, then you can and should be called out for this, just like any other form of art. So when you look at comedy it's weird because you'll sometimes have people admit that they do believe in objective quality in art, but they'll caveat it with except for comedy, right? They'll go like, but comedy is subjective. It's the most subjective. Now, I will say there is a sense where this is true because different people do find different things funny. Senses of humor differ more than in any other aesthetic category, right? Like you have people will find certain, people's senses of humor. That's an aesthetic category where you will find something funny that somebody else doesn't find funny, or vice versa. But the problem with this is I do think that there is an objective standard that you can point to where you go, this is either objectively funny or objectively not. You might not laugh at it, but it hits the objective standard of good comedy.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to get at here. So here's an example. Like the two versions of The Office. So there's the British Office and the American Office. If you talk to people about which they prefer, feelings are going to be very strong about both of them, right? There will be people who think that, and generally it doesn't intersect very much. Obviously there are exceptions, but there are a lot of people who adore the British Office find the American Office incredibly unfunny. A lot of people who adore the American Office find the British Office incredibly unfunny. I am in the category, I like the American Office. British humor does not jive with me, generally speaking.
Right.
So what is the difference? And can you say that one is funny and the other isn't? I would argue no. I think that both of them are funny, but I laugh at one and not the other is because of the certain aesthetic of humor that I prefer.
Yes.
So what is the difference between the two? Well, the British Office, like a lot of British humor, it is much more dry comedy. So the comedy of the British Office is a lot more, how should I put this?
Cruel.
I don't know exactly how the dry seems to work, but a lot of the humor is much more subtle maybe, whereas the American Office is much more broad.
Yeah.
A lot of go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of what people sort of take as comedic humor from what's the word? Excuse me. English comedic humor is mostly sort of like clever wordplay rather than how do I want to put it? It's mostly clever wordplay rather than like something like outrageous or absurd happening. Like and there's a certain amount of even like disrespect and sort of verbal absurdism, right? Like when the to compare, like some of the things you're probably going to bring up in the English Office, and then compare it to like sort of Three Stooges. Like in the Three Stooges, if they want to disrespect some noble, some rich, guy in their house, they show up, they slap a pie in his face, they ruin his plumbing, they eat his food, and they scarp her, usually after demanding payment or something. Or saying it's on the house or something like that. So it's like there's a lot of physical comedy that's very absurdist. Like you can see the absurdity of Curly trying to fit 100 different pipes together to try and get a leak to stop in somebody's shower. And then in the end, all he does is connect it up to the chandelier and it gets all the partygoers wet or something. There's a lot of intrinsic comedy to that a lot of types
Right.
tend
So
to deny. But then compared to like say some of the British stuff, it's based on that verbal confrontation. But however, a lot of that verbal stuff is actually quite cruel when experienced in real life, which I think is something I'll go over later.
yeah, the British Office is a famously cruel show. Now the American Office is as well, but the British Office is more cruel,
Yeah.
and intentionally so. Um, there's a lot of differences, a few very instructive ones between the two. One of the very instructive differences is the way the British Office ends. It is.
Hmm.
I have watched this scene specifically. I've watched a few scenes separate. I tried to watch a full episode and turned it off because I didn't like it. But like I've watched a few individual scenes, and this scene in particular, I do got to give it some credit for being absolutely gut wrenching. So you know anything about The Office? You know there's a love triangle, right?
Hmm.
Pam, the receptionist, Jim has a crush on her, but she is engaged to Roy. British Office has the same love triangle with essentially the same characters, but with slightly different names. I don't even remember their names in the British Office. I'm just going to call them British Jim, British Pam, British Roy, right? Uh, all right, good. We've got it set up. Well, what happens in the American Office? Well, Jim eventually marries Pam. They have kids. They live happily ever after. Literally, that's how the show ends. They live happily ever after. Um, what happens at the end of the British Office? Well, this is a very famous scene, and it's a brutal scene, and I got to give it credit for feeling like an absolute gut punch when I watched it. Uh, Pam is going to be moving. British Pam is going to be leaving the office, like moving to America, I think, with British Roy. And British Jim is talking to the camera and going, I'm okay with it. Like, I've accepted it. It's fine. I understand. She's engaged. And then he goes, you know what? And then he stops and takes off his microphone. And you see him, you don't hear any of the dialogue. You see him walk back and talk to British Pam. And you just, like, don't hear anything. You see the conversation. He says something to her. She looks at him. She gives him a hug. And then he walks back and goes back to his desk. He doesn't talk to the camera. He goes back to work, doing what he would like, just working normally for a few seconds. Then he looks up and he says, she said no, by the way. And then he goes back to his work. Absolutely brutal. Uh, Genuinely one of the saddest things I've ever seen on television. Like, that scene is not in the American Office and could not be in the American Office. Tonally, it is all wrong.
Hmm. There's a
Like,
there's even though like England is very much the like sort of forefather of America in general. Like the humor and the spirit of things has gone so completely different that it's really just not the same at all. Like you can't really compare it. Like, because in an American one, that would be unacceptable. Like, we'd still be hearing about how bad the ending of The Office was to this time in this context.
by the way, they actually retconned that in a Christmas special where British Jim and British Pam do get together. But I think the Christmas special is considered somewhat non-essential. Like more like not bad or anything, but more like a sop to the fans, which is kind of
Right.
interesting because that scene in the British Office, like just absolute gut punch of a scene, and it couldn't fly as the finale to the American Office. It could not, it would not, it did not. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's another moment too that's really interesting to me because of the contrast. So in both shows, there is a subplot of the company's not doing hot and they're going to need to shut down a branch, right? Well, in the British Office, they offer the boss, Ricky Gervais, right? British Michael. They offer him a job and he takes it. And in one of the famous lines in the show, he says, so I got some bad news and some good news. He goes, the bad news is you're all going to be fired, but the good news is I got a promotion. And one of them responds, that's not bad news and good news. That's bad news and irrelevant news. And then he just kind of looks and goes, yeah, okay. Well, he takes the job they're all going to be fired because he took this promotion, right? So he's the reason that they're all getting fired. And then he fails the physical, which is a pretty good gag, right? Like that he fails the physical. So he no longer gets the promotion. And he goes back and goes, good news, you all still have your jobs, whatever. In the American office, something very different happens. Michael does not get offered a promotion, and they are going to shut down his branch. It's all but a done deal. So Michael and Dwight, who is kind of his assistant, I don't know how I would, like, he's just a salesman who's, like, really loyal to Michael, but also
He's
very
the lick spittle.
Yeah. They decide they're going to drive out to their boss's house and camp outside of it, try and beg him for help, but he doesn't even go home that night, so they don't even see him. Meanwhile, Jim has moved to a different branch of the office, and their branch is the one that's surviving. It's Michael's branch that's being shut down until the boss of that branch reveals that he used the promotion, his job at Dunder Mifflin, which is the paper company. He's used his job at Dunder Mifflin to leverage himself into a promotion at Staples, and he's actually leaving. And everybody who is at that branch is now getting fired. And they cut to Jim, and Jim says this to the camera very specifically. He says, say what you will about Michael Scott, but he would never do that. Now, that line is fascinating to me because that is exactly what the British version of Michael did. Exactly. But the American version of Michael would never do that. And they're right, he wouldn't. Because the American version of Michael is a fundamentally different character. It's really interesting. And I'm sure that was entirely intentional. Like, it's way too specific. I'm not sure, like, so yeah, the British office is a lot meaner. Is it less funny? Well, what is, which by the way, that's saying something, because the American office, I've been going over, if anything, the nicer moments from it, because, like, the American office can get extremely mean.
Yes. It's not like they don't get mean. It's just that there's a humor to it that is just missing from what I've seen of the British office, what little I've seen. Because actually, this is going to come as a shock. Even though I have a British mother, I am actually not the biggest fan of British television. This might come as a shock. There's something about it that I just don't like. I've seen some stuff in Doctor Who that, of course, I liked. You know, the Weeping Angels episode is actually, very good as horror. There's
the Van Gogh episode of Doctor Who was pretty touching.
I disagree. I think it was sop. I think it was sop for the masses, slop for the pig trough. There is more honor in Mo. Howard.
That's the only episode of Doctor Who I've ever seen, and I liked it quite a bit.
Sop. But the you should watch the Weeping Angels episode, the famous one.
I should. The premise is pretty amazing.
It is. But what was I saying? There's a sphere to it that I just can't stand. Right? Like, there's some shows I have really enjoyed. Keeping Up Appearances is hilarious. It's about this very mean, vain woman trying to be, very proud and preening. But in reality, she's a failure, and actually she's quite normal. And she has this neighbor she bullies, whose brother, who, let's be real, was gay. But, they never really talked about it like that because it was the 90s, 80s. She bullies horribly, and she has a son who's probably gay, who's almost certainly gay and certainly a waste of space. And then her husband Richard's much put upon. But his one bit of life that he loved was his job at the bank, his normal job at the bank that he has to retire from. And so she would go something like, "It's the bouquet residence, the lady of the house speaking." "Why, yes, it's Sheridan. You know Sheridan, who's part of the equestrian club at Cambridge, don't you know? You need more money for a horse costume, Sheridan? This is a very strange equestrian club." Uh, or it's something like, "Oh, it's my sister Violet. The one with a large house, estate, and a pool with room for a pony." And then, like, what's funny is that later.
It's interesting.
Hold
Go
on.
ahead. Sorry,
But
finish your thought.
but what made it funny is that it was presented, and then she'd say something ridiculous. But then it would be like at later seasons they would like mouth it along with her. Like Richard would mouth it, her bullied neighbor would mouth it. Like it's BK residence, lady of the house speaking. "Oh, it's Violet. It's my sister Violet Rose." And then she'd be like mouthing, blah blah blah, room for a pony. So on and so forth. She'd have. But it's like, what were you gonna say? Excuse me.
No, no. What I was going to say is, it's interesting because when I think of like the most mean-spirited American shows, a few come to mind. One of them is going to be surprising to people, but I think it is very defensible. But The Office, Seinfeld,
Yeah.
Always Sunny in Philadelphia,
Seinfeld,
right?
definitely. Like,
And Always Sunny is probably the most. And this is the surprising one, Parks and Recreation.
really, I didn't think it was that mean.
Part. I would argue, and I will argue. I'm going to make that argument now. Parks and Recreation is one of the meanest spirited shows I have ever seen in my life. I have never
Really?
seen a show with a more cynical view of politics, of human nature, of America than Parks and Recreation. And I think that this is what I was trying to get at, though. What's interesting about American shows that they are very mean spirited, but they don't appear that way tonally. This is one of the reasons that nobody liked the Seinfeld finale when it came out, because even though it was in keeping with the spirit and philosophy of the series that these are all terrible people.
Right. He'll be back. He always
Comes off as a lighthearted.
Yeah.
Right?
Like
it doesn't really fit. Always Sunny as well. I've seen Always Sunny. Now, some of the jokes in Always Sunny are among the funniest I've ever seen. Like the one where the episode where they learn that there is a program where you could take people who are like on welfare, and to give them a job, they'll just assign them to a business and the government will pay them. So they go, so wait a minute, we can get a slave? And then like Danny DeVito, who's the bar owner, is just like goes, well, what do you think? And then he like looks at the paper, looks at them, and he throws up his hand. He goes, let's go buy us a slave. They're like, nice. So they go to the welfare office and they're looking around. They go, all right, all the people here for welfare, they all need jobs. Go say, so which one would you like? And then they're looking around. There's like a black guy there and it's like some fat dude. And he goes, I take that one. He points at the fat guy. And then his friend looks and goes, oh, come on. He goes, what? He goes, you only picked him because he wasn't black. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, no, you can't not pick a slave because they're black. That's racist. He goes, you gotta pick the black slaves too. It's incredible. It is legitimately one of the funniest things I've ever seen. That entire scene is gold. But it's weird too. Like the tone of the show is almost like they don't even notice how dark it is. You know what I mean? Like it's incredibly dark, but none of the characters involved are all like oblivious to it. You know, they're all horrible people and they either can't tell or don't care. Seinfeld's even more like it's unclear if they can even tell that they're terrible people. George could, because they all tell George constantly. But like, does Elaine know she's a terrible person?
No,
You know, does Jerry know? It's unclear.
not.
George knows, but George knows because they tell him this constantly. And in a way, George is weirdly like, he has accepted this about himself. He's like, yeah, I'm a piece of shit. That's who I am. But Elaine and Jerry kind of have it. So I'm going to make my argument about Parks and Rec, though, because it's important to me. What is the philosophy of Parks and Rec? You got two characters with contrasting political philosophies. You have Ron and Leslie. And they're meant to be like polar opposites of each other, but actually pay attention to it. Ron is a libertarian. He's an arch libertarian. He believes in libertarianism like to its most extreme extent. The famous Ron, well, yeah, Ron has many famous quotes. One of his famous quotes is like, "My ideal government is one man in a room with a button deciding who and who not to nuke." Like, that's Ron's version. It's a great quote, right?
Right.
That's Ron's version of libertarianism. Famously, there is a famous scene in the show where there's a government shutdown and Leslie is horrified, and then they zoom in on Ron's face and he just has a massive grin on his face. And then in the next episode, he goes, "So we're discussing ideas for saving money in the government." And they go, "Ron, you have any ideas?" He goes, "Why, yes, actually, I have many ideas." So he goes, "One thing we could do is we could sell the parking lots at City Hall to the people." And then they like all look at each other like, we can't do that. And then he goes, "No worries, no worries. I have many ideas." And then he like goes to page 2 and goes, "Next." And then, so Ron just hates the government, but however, he is the most moral person in the show, the most personally honorable, right? He has personal morals that that are very strong, and he is an honorable human being who sticks to his word. So why does Ron hate the government so much? And what does the show want you to think about him? Well, for one thing, Ron is fundamentally irrational because Ron uses his job at the Parks Department to intentionally do as little work as possible because he thinks that the government is useless. However, if you're smart here, you could spot the contradiction. By not doing work, Ron is creating the very waste that he accuses the government of creating. He is part of the problem. That's the entire point of Ron as a character, is that Ron, in refusing to actually help people and doing as little as possible, is creating waste in the government. He is making the government actively worse. So you're not supposed to think Ron is correct. And it gets even more than that. Why does Ron hate the government so much? Well, it's because that Ron is so personally competent at just about everything he does that no matter what the government tells him, they're probably not going to do a better job than he personally would. This is illustrated really, really well in an early episode of the show. Ron wants to make some sort of carpenter addition to his house, but he needs to jump through a bunch of bureaucratic red tape, and he's extremely pissed about it until somebody comes in, offers to help him with it from, who works in the government, right? Which is whatever. That's the resolution to the episode. So why is Ron frustrated with the bureaucratic red tape? Because Ron is already a very good carpenter. The government is not telling him how to do anything better than he can already do it. Ron can do it. But the problem is that Ron is uniquely competent in the show. He is easily and by far the most competent character. Of course, he would have this attitude of the government. So what you need to ask yourself is, what is Parks and Rec's view of the common people? How does it view them? And I am not exaggerating when I say I have never seen a show with a lower opinion of the masses. Leslie, who is a big supporter of big government. She's a huge believer in the government. Leslie is the opposite of Ron in this way. Leslie is annoying and obnoxious, but she is right. She is always right every single time. She is never wrong. Never. Like, I'm not kidding about this. Actually pay attention. The only time she's wrong is when she's going to do something personally immoral, right? Her personal morals, Ron is stronger than. But policy-wise, if everybody followed Leslie's policies, then the world would just straight up be a better place. You should listen to Leslie. And Leslie is a huge believer in the government. So how does it view the masses? Well, Leslie likes to go to town halls so that she can hear from the people. And I'm not exaggerating when I say the people are portrayed as bigoted, stupid, useless, borderline retarded. And
That's
I
my
mean that like
America.
into
That's my America. That's my America.
yeah, that's their view. Like racist, incredibly racist, um, easily manipulated, gullible. Like, in other words, so what is the message of Parks and Rec? The message of Parks and Rec is that we need the Leslies of the world to take care of us. If we didn't have them, then America would be doomed.
Right.
Democracy is almost seen as unfortunate. Like, we kind of have to have it in order to elect people. But ideally, Leslie would just be in charge. Like, at one point, Leslie is voted out of office. There's a runoff.
Sure.
So they do a good job of showing that, like, oh, it's Leslie's personal qualities. The fact that she's so obnoxious has led her to make enemies, and that's why she's voted off. But that's the point, right? If America were smart, they would never vote out Leslie because Leslie's always right. They can't see past her obnoxious qualities to show that she's actually always right. Even in the government shutdown scene, Leslie comes up with a plan to avert the shutdown. It would have worked, except that she turns it in too late.
Huh.
So, in other words, if the government had just listened to Leslie, there would be no shutdown. If the government and the people were so stupid that they couldn't see past Leslie's obnoxious qualities to see that really she was an incredible political candidate.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, it has a very cynical view of human nature. Like, do you remember? So, here's another great example. Do you remember when there was a whole thing about in California, they banned like jumbo-sized drinks?
yeah.
Now, this is obviously, I think you would agree, this is about as clear an example of absurd government overreach as there could possibly be, right? Like,
That's right.
I don't think I've never met a single person who believed this was a good idea. So what position do you think Parks and Rec took? Well, they introduced two characters who were just like evil McEvil villains. Literally no shades of nuance at all. Who had a drink that was like the size of, a small bathtub. And they were like, what? The people, and it had like 500,000 grams of sugar. And they were like, we're just giving the people what they want, and you're trying to oppose. They were like, and then Leslie's like, no, we're just being reasonable. We just want you to not serve our kids slop. Or the episode where they tried to Leslie wanted to introduce like extremely inappropriate sex ed to schools, like condoms and things. And then the people opposing it were seen as like extremely bigoted, extremely stupid, extremely evil conservatives who were manipulating the also very, very stupid and gullible masses.
Right. See, like
this is Parks and Rec. That's how they view the people.
Yeah, and like to me, I dig why you're saying this. Like, there's certainly something to it. It's certainly mean spirited. There's other things like other shows that do this. Like Pinky and the Brain had very stupid people. It was from Spielberg, Warner Brothers. The people were.
See, here's the difference, though.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
The people were fit to be ruled. They're often seen. They have various neighbors. They talk about weird stuff. They have weird things, and it's very funny. The thing with Parks and Recs, and I think you'll agree with me on this, is that there's no actual redeeming quality to these people. If Brain could take over the world by having everyone go to Chia Earth with a marketing brand of free T-shirts, Parks and Rec seems like the type that if the government wasn't holding their hand all the time, they'd fall over dead or drown in a 1-inch puddle of water.
Yep. Exactly.
So it's like there's a certain balance to it. Like in Seinfeld, what little I've watched of it, I don't really find it funny. But it seems like everyone is equally evil. Owen Benjamin did a really
Yes.
great thing for it, but it seems like in reality, it's not like Parks and Recs where it's a bunch of stupid yokels with uh, this government stuff. Rather, it seems like everyone's in hell, and hell is everyone else. In New York City, which
Yes.
I assume is real to life as well. So, uh, so it's one of those things where it's like, um, how do I want to put it? Where it's like it's understandable, right? With some stuff like keeping up appearances, the Hyacinth has a, um, or is it, yeah, brother of some, no, her sister married Onslow, who is the lowest class of lowest class England. And I don't mean the knife wielding maniacs that they've got right now. I mean literally British lower class. He goes around in a wife beater. He has a car that backfires hilariously every time. He's sort of this common man. When he wants to change the channel on the TV, he slaps it. There's a million little things to it, and they've got another sister that they're putting up, who is a shameless flirt, who's obsessed with the bullied neighbor's brother, who I will remind you may be gay, but certainly not as gay as her son, Sheridan. Uh, so there's a whole lot of bad things happening, but the what redeems it is actually going to be something of the climax of the sort of the important part of the joke. The important part of the joke is who's getting punished. When the Three Stooges walk into somebody's mansion and they mess everything up, and pies are being thrown and the shower is doing this, and who knows what else, who cares what else, what are being punished aren't common people. you know, in reality, the Three Stooges may be a bit ridiculous, but they're fairly non-malicious. It only gets ramped up when somebody with a stuffed shirt or axe to grind against them or something else like that, comes up and fights them. In keeping up appearances, even though Hyacinth does have a bit of control over her bullied neighbor and her henpecked husband, in reality, she does get her comeuppance. If she wants to do a fancy picnic on the lake, oh, like all those rich people, and will be seen on the lake, don't you know, Richard? What's going to happen is she's going to fall in the water, she's going to lose all her stuff, and she's going to have to put up a break. And to her credit, and what makes it even more lighthearted, is the fact that she puts on a brave face and gives them a queenly wave. Like, yes, I'm covered in pond scum and ducks, but oh, I'm so dignified even in my embarrassment. So it doesn't feel like they're being cruel to her, even though she's cruel to others. The other characters have their wins, which sort of balance things out. Characters like Onslow has to put up with Hyacinth. That's kind of his punishment, even though he's actually a very nice guy and a friend to Richard. They go out drinking together. Like I keep up bringing up this somewhat now obscure television show because it has a very good balance. You have the cruelty of the various characters, but you also have the right people getting their comeuppance. The brother who's a confirmed bachelor or whatever, maybe a confirmed bachelor, I can't remember, it's been years, but he has to deal with Hyacinth, and he gets drug along on these schemes he hates. There's a vicar who's a little bit into the fallen woman Rose. Not maybe that's Rose. I might be mixing up the names. Not the
It
bullied
doesn't
neighbor.
matter.
It doesn't matter. And so like, but he gets punished because his wife is always there over his shoulder, and she'll hit him with something if he goes overboard or falls out into the street with somebody or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like the point is that there's a balance to all these things. Like if you actually like say, okay, this is cruel, this is not cruel, these things would be like quote unquote karmically balanced out, which may be a weird thing to hear from a Christian, but it's actually very important in comedy. What
Yep.
I find, for, let's, we've been talking for a little bit.
Well,
For it,
let me pause for a moment. I don't know if I would say it's important in comedy in terms of making something funny, because contrary you, I actually do think Seinfeld is very, very funny.
mm,
I agree wholeheartedly with every single thing that you said about it. It is 100% true and more, right?
hmm
It is a extremely, extremely mean-spirited show with horrible people. There are no good people. This is one of the issues with the finale, right? Like, that people have pointed out, which is that the four leads get their comeuppance. The problem is acting like they deserve any more than anyone else,
right.
right? Like, going, yeah, they are terrible, but you know what? Everybody is terrible. Like, they're all really bad. So why do our four leads get singled out for it? The other problem, of course, is the tonal shift. This has all been framed in Seinfeld as like the petty annoyances of New Yorkers, but somebody made a really good point once. I watched a video, you might have seen it because Vox Day linked it years ago. There was somebody who was reviewing no, they were reviewing Joe Rogan, actually. I'm sorry, but the same guy, he reviewed Joe Rogan's comedy special and said because it was really
What was that?
also reviewed like late career Jerry Seinfeld, and
Yeah.
famously, late career Jerry Seinfeld is also not very good. And early career Jerry Seinfeld, I will admit, I think his stand up is funny. Late career, no, he's not. He's lost it, right? So what's going on here? Well, somebody mentioned it and they said, you notice Bill Burr, like he has his comedians in cabs thing where he interviews other comedians. And Bill Burr, back when Bill Burr was funny, how the mighty have fallen. But
I
anyway,
know.
Bill
F is for
Burr has a
family was
conversation.
great, by the way.
What was that?
F is for family was pretty great, by the way.
Yeah, how the mighty have fallen. But anyway,
Mm,
Bill Burr, I believe it was talking to Jerry Seinfeld, and he makes a point that is absolutely correct. He says, people say that your comedy is about nothing. He goes, but man, I know better. Man, they aren't listening. You have some of the meanest, meanest comedy I have ever seen. He goes, and he's absolutely right. Jerry's comedy, his brand of comedy, is about how seethingly angry everything makes him, no matter how petty. That is the heart of Seinfeld, is that he is talking about the petty annoyances of life and exaggerating them to the point where they become a big deal. Things that are really not that big a deal are just kind of weird, but are kind of annoying. For example, Jerry, like, this is going to sound weird as an example, but it's actually, like, kind of makes sense when it's explained. Jerry has a girlfriend who likes to hang around the house naked. Now, why is this funny? Well, and eventually Jerry gets so uncomfortable with it that he breaks up with her, even though she's really hot. Now, why is this funny? Well, this is funny because what they're talking about is something that's probably a fantasy for a lot of guys, right?
right.
Oh, you have a really hot girlfriend who likes to hang around. But Jerry is pointing out something that is extremely petty but makes him sort of uncomfortable about it, which is that when you focus on the human body too long, it can get kind of gross, right? Is this like a quote-unquote big deal? I mean, not really, right? Like, that's just life. It's true, I suppose. You probably didn't think of it very much, but occasionally you probably, it's come up, right? You think of it. Well, he makes it the focus of an episode, and that's the joke. Or one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, The Pen. A relative gifts Jerry an astronaut pen, one of those pens you could write with upside down. Jerry says, wow, thanks, I really like the pen. And his family goes, wait, you accepted a gift from Uncle Joe? And he goes, what did you tell him? I told him I liked the pen. You told him you liked it? He goes, no, you shouldn't even have accepted the gift. It was a gift. You're supposed to refuse it. He goes, all I said was I liked the pen. And then later it's like, you probably offended him, and that's like the whole episode, right? Now, once again, this is like petty family politics, very small potatoes, right? You've probably had a situation like this where, oh, you didn't really understand the gift-giving protocol. You weren't supposed to actually accept when they offered to pay, right? You were supposed to say thank you. I got it, but you accepted, and now it's awkward, right?
Right.
That's the structure of the joke. Is this a big deal? No, it's not a big deal. But Jerry treats it like a big deal, and that's the humor. You know, none of these things are that big. Now, in the final season, it gets more absurd, and the humor is driven more by absurdity. And by the way, not always in a bad way. Some of the episodes from the final season are quite good. I agree. I watched a video essay on this where somebody made the argument that, like, actually the final season of Seinfeld is quite funny. But, like, the entire show is like this. You can go on and on with examples. The Chinese restaurant, right? They have to wait in line for a really long time at a Chinese restaurant, and they walk out, and right after they walk out, their name is called to get seated. You know, you've probably had that happen to you. It's very relatable. That's the heart of Seinfeld. So why is it so mean-spirited? Well, the reason it's so mean-spirited is that this is their life. This is what they consider important. These are all things that we've all gone through, and it's validating to see somebody treat them with both humor, but also as, yeah, that is really annoying, isn't it? Right? It's funny because they treat it as funny, but it's funny because it's annoying, right? Like, you just want your seat at the fucking restaurant, you know? It's the same sort of idea. So Seinfeld is a very mean-spirited show. It's a show where everybody is mean-spirited, but that's because it's a show where there is no, like, there's no more important thing, if that makes sense, right? Like,
Right.
the petty, meaningless, miserable moments of life are all there is. That's why it's hell. That's what makes it hell, right? It never gets any better. There's never anything higher that anyone is striving towards. George gets engaged, and the joke is that his wife is a complete nothing of a character, and George desperately wants to get out of the marriage because he finds her boring, but he's too miserable and too much of a coward to actually tell her. And then in an extremely funny moment, in my opinion, though apparently there was like a whole backlash because people found it too dark. I do not. I thought it was funny. Maybe I'm just that twisted. She dies because she has an allergic reaction because George didn't spend money on expensive stamps, and the cheap glue on the back of his stamps killed her. Now, I think that that's a very funny gag because it's about how much of a piece of shit George is. And then everybody is convinced for a while that George murdered her because he wanted to get out of it and, like, intentionally did it. But he didn't. He just got cheap stamps. Now, this whole thing is like, in a different show, getting married would change the characters, right? Like, George, in getting married, would find someone to live for, someone to fall in love with. Even Friends, which is one of the most shallow shows ever made, does this, right? Even
Right.
Friends. And Seinfeld just doesn't. George gets engaged, and he changes not at all. If anything, gets worse. So, yeah, it's fascinating. But I would argue that's funny. I would say that comedy doesn't necessarily depend on that balance. I think that just creates a different type of show. I would say that good morals and good taste do. I also don't think that Seinfeld has to be like this, and neither does Always Sunny. They choose to be like this. You could be funny without being like this, or you could even be cynical and mean without being like this. But they're neither. You know, this is what they choose to be, right? And I don't know if that's something that should necessarily be celebrated. But yeah, like, the difference between the British and the American Office is that, for one thing, I would say that the British Office is more consistent. I read an absolutely brilliant analysis of the American Office that said what it was essentially about was it was a show about sociopaths and what it takes to succeed in the corporate world, right? And they said when we say sociopath, we don't mean like a clinical definition. For one thing, there is no clinical definition of sociopath. That's made up, right? There is no such thing. So sociopath, like people will have there is a common definition that people use. They go, oh, it means you lack emotion or whatever. But the truth is, you won't find that anywhere in the DSM, right? Like it's just not there. So
Sure.
what do we mean? What was that?
Sure. I mean, it's more about unfeeling, uncaring towards your fellow man, being unable to put yourself into their shoes.
Right, but what I mean, like, I understand this, and I could accept it as a definition if we were having a conversation specifically about it, which we're not. What I mean, though, is that it is functionally speaking, like, this is a fan. Almost, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but I guess like a fan-made definition, right?
Sure.
Like, you will never see. Nobody can be diagnosed as a sociopath because it's not a diagnosis. Like, it simply isn't. You know. The diagnosis of sociopath does not exist.
Well, it
Okay,
used
great.
to exist. Like, so here's the thing. I dig what you're saying, and I'm pushing back on this because it's very specific. But before the DSM turned gay, they had things like psychopaths and sociopaths and all this other stuff that they felt was a little bit more of a medley of things, sure, but like it did exist. Like it wasn't, like I studied this recently for a job I didn't get, like psychopathy and stuff like
Oh,
that.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
So
like,
sociopathy was in the DSM.
uh, I think so. I know psychopathy was.
Psychopathy, I know was. And notice I'm not claiming psychopath.
Mm,
Part of what I'm pushing back against is that people make a distinction between psychopath and sociopath, and they make it oftentimes very with a lot of protesting, right? Like a lot of grandstanding. Like, excuse me, I'm a sociopath. Sherlock loved this trick. I'm not a hero. I'm a high functioning sociopath,
I hate that
which
line
like
so much.
yeah, which is dumb, but whatever. That's not like my point being though is the funny thing is that like there isn't really a distinction between sociopath and psychopath. People
Sure.
eventually kind of came up with one and they used it in popular conversation, but in reality there isn't actually one. You won't find it. Like not in any official capacity. So that's my real point, right? So I'm using sociopath in a different way. What I mean is if you're at the top of the business world, you need to have the ability to say and do the right things no matter what the people below you think or care about. And honestly, whether or not you're good at running the company doesn't matter, right? And it's almost irrelevant. So who's a sociopath in the show? Well, Ryan is a sociopath. Ryan the intern, right? He's a recurring character. In one of the best jokes in the show, he rises through the ranks and becomes part of like the associate class or the sociopath class in the company, right? He becomes corporate, and then he gets caught committing fraud and is fired. And then Michael works with him to run his own paper company. And when they're rehired eventually by Dunder Mifflin, because that was his condition because Dunder Mifflin needed to buy them out, and his condition was that they get rehired. Holy crap, there's a samurai academy and there are $39 lessons. I just passed a billboard. I know what I'm doing. Sorry, I got distracted.
No,
All
I did.
right, where was I?
I
Anyway,
did some Viennese fencing earlier today. It was great.
samurai, like literally, they just said Samurai Academy, 3 lessons, $39. Holy shit, I'm so in. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So, sociopathy in the office, right? Like Ryan rises up through the ranks, becomes corporate, but is caught committing fraud. And one of the best jokes, when Michael is rehired, he makes them all rehire them in their original positions. So Ryan is now the intern again. It's a great joke, and he remains the intern for like the remainder of the show. But anyway, like what happened with Ryan? Like why did he fail in the way that he did? Well, Ryan was a sociopath who had not mastered what it means to be a sociopath. He shot too far and got caught. Right? Now, what about Jim? What's the tragedy of Jim? Because there is a tragedy, like something, or more like the tragedy of British Jim. Because the tragedy is actually not with American Jim, and this is important. It's one of the fundamental differences between the shows. The tragedy of Jim is that he is too smart to be a corporate drone. all of the drones in the office have distinct quirks that are how they tolerate their day, but they don't want to go higher. Creed is weird. Phyllis is a slob. Kevin is
I
dumb.
love Creed, by the way. I've been voted the
Creed's hilarious.
I've been voted the Creed
Creed
of
is
my
fantastic.
local area multiple times whenever I'm in a more corporate environment. It's like it's not even a question. They're like, okay, who's the Creed? It's Ben. All right.
Yeah. Oh, Creed has some of the best lines. Like the time it was Halloween, he walks in with a shirt covered in blood, and they go, "Wow, Creed, great serial killer costume." And then they cut to Creed. He goes, "Today was Halloween. That was very fortunate." And then they just cut away and never explain it again. And the episode Gay Witch Hunt, when they cut to Creed and he goes, "Oh no, I'm very," he goes, so they learn that there's a gay guy in the office, and they cut to Creed and he goes, "Oh no," he goes, "I'm very open to other sexualities." He goes, "Back in the 80s, I used to sleep around with all sorts of people. Did a few men sneak in there? Who's to say?" And the fact, by the way, that he's not even a character. He's actually Creed Bratton of the actual band, The Grassroots, and he just plays himself. Is also great. But anyway, yeah, everybody in the office needs some way to tolerate the day. None of them have the ability to rise higher, except arguably Oscar. But Oscar has made the choice that he doesn't want to fight in the dog-eat-dog world of corporate America and would prefer to stay as a drone.
Right.
We see this in the episode where Michael, who is brings Oscar with him to a corporate meeting, but Michael does want to, like, he's trying to impress corporate. Oscar is smart enough to know you don't want to get noticed by corporate, because then they'll expect things of you, and if you don't deliver, you're in trouble. Oscar doesn't want to try and deliver. He doesn't want to play the game. Michael just wants to impress corporate because he's too stupid to understand this. So Michael presents an idea of Oscar's, and Oscar is annoyed, right? So all of them have their own things. None of them are able to rise up, with one exception, Jim. Jim can leave. He can rise up. There is an excellent scene that's very subtle where he plays basketball with David Wallace, and who is a corporate guy. He's one of the sociopaths, right? Now, once again, I'm using the word where you go, well, I don't think David Wallace is a sociopath. No, he's not literally a sociopath. But what he is he is able to be corporate, which makes him functionally able to act that way, right? And in order to be a sociopath and succeed in that world, you need to be able to speak the language of the sociopath, something Michael is not smart enough to do. So him and David Wallace have a conversation during pickup basketball where David Wallace tests Jim to see if he's corporate material. He asks him, "So, what do you think of Michael?" And Jim thinks for a moment and says something in a very measured way. I forget exactly what it was, but it was like, "I think Michael is good exactly where he is as boss." Or he's like, "I think Michael is good as boss in his position." And David Wallace gives him a nod, as in, "You've passed the test," right? If he had thrown Michael under the bus in order to get the job, he would have lost, right? Or if he had been too eager and like said Michael was more competent than he really was, that would have been a sign that he was either A, stupid, or B, too loyal, right? And he also would have lost. So Jim needed to thread the needle and say exactly the right thing to David Wallace to prove that he can jive with corporate. So Jim can leave if he wants to, but Jim chooses not to. Why? Because of Pam, right? He wants to stay. And unlike the others who are incapable of leaving, except for Oscar, who might be smart enough but doesn't want to engage in the dog-eat-dog world of the politics, Jim would consider it. He would consider leaving. In other circumstances, he might very well do it, but he chooses not to because he values Pam, and he decides to stay with her. So what about Michael's role in the show? Where does he stand in all of this? Well, Michael is promoted where he is because he fits a very specific role. It makes sense why you would promote him so nobody will look twice. Michael was an excellent salesman, but he's no threat to anybody above him because he's an idiot. That is why Michael is placed where he is. People will say it's the Peter principle, but it's wrong. That's not quite it. Not on The Office.
Right. And
The
there's
truth is that Michael has to be where he is to keep corporate safe. They want him there. They're never going to fire him, and they don't.
yeah.
Right? He is perfect where he is. If you put a Jim in that position, and they do in a later episode, but at that point, either you could argue A, the writing got worse, or B, and this is what I'm inclined to think, they understand now that Jim has not chosen the corporate route, so he's safe. You don't want to move Michael up or down on that ladder. Now, the British office has a different sort of tragedy. British Jim is smart enough is in hell, essentially. And I'm not even kidding about this. I mean, that's like the metaphor. He is smart enough to know that he's trapped, unlike British Dwight, right? Who is not smart enough to realize this. But he is not smart enough to escape. Therefore, he tolerates his day by pranking British Dwight, right? That's the only way he could get through the day, is constant petty distractions to create humor. Right? Like, that's the only way he could tolerate it. That's the only way Jim can tolerate it, too. But we see that Jim can escape, chooses not to stay with Pam. It's a very big and very subtle but interesting difference. Michael at middle management makes perfect sense because you want someone you know can play the game with you. That's who you're going to promote. Michael can't play the game. You can't promote him. However, if you put somebody under you who is actually competent, well, then they might eventually ascend to corporate, and that is a danger if they're not willing to play the game. So you get somebody who nobody will look twice at. Michael's a good salesman. Of course we promoted him. But who is actually not a threat to corporate at all. It's not the Peter principle. The Peter principle is like that cream only rises so far is kind of how I would describe it, right? Like, you know, he's very good at one aspect of the job but not another, so they overlooked it. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what's going on in the office. I don't think it's overlooked at all. I think Michael's position is very intentional. I think they know exactly why he's there. I think they want him there. In fact, it's actually really interesting how the Michael Scott Paper Company arc factors into this. Because
we're done talking about The Office a bit. You know, we've talked about it a lot.
You can pause here. I think that I find the philosophy of it very interesting, though.
I mean, we can talk about the philosophy, but like, you know, the events are going to get lost in the weeds because one, I haven't seen the show, and two, you know, that's not really what we're talking about. Like, I guess for Peter principle, I could say that the Peter principle is fundamentally in competence, not competence. So it's like you rise only to where you're competent. Well, guess what? I've been dude's right-hand man in different things. I haven't, you know, done well in some things. I've done well in other things. I failed basic stuff and I failed big stuff. Like, it's one of those things where it's not really what people apply it to. Like, the fact is that, you know, like you said, Michael is exactly where he needs to be. He's their best salesman or something stupid like that. You know, he wants to be promoted because he's shameless. You know, and it's very funny. You know, to bring it back to the subject of the thing, it's very funny to watch these things.
Yeah, the joke here, right? The joke is watching it, and The Office has some of the funniest scenes I've ever seen. Like the first aid scene of The Office. Me and my buddy in college, we used to like look it up on our breaks like every day and like just crack up because the first aid scene is one of the funniest scenes in television history. I would argue the fire scene as well is equally funny. Dinner Party is maybe the greatest comedic episode of television ever. Certainly in like the top 10. You know, it's an incredibly funny episode of television. Do you know what I'm referring to with Dinner Party?
No. I haven't seen the show. I have seen a little bit, though. I did see this one episode where Michael, and this is more of like I was stuck in the same room as it was playing, where Michael put Willy Wonka tickets in the boxes of paper, and they all went to the same person. But then it worked out in the end after corporate like panicked because they said, oh, this is such a great deal. Let's make the biggest order we've ever had. So it was more profitable than anything they'd ever done before. So it was pretty
That's
funny.
incredible.
And it was all the right ways, kind of funny. But no, it's like there's a certain amount of comedy in sort of a world of cruelty. Like even though the Office people are fairly, I've never felt that they've been abnormal. But
No, I would say this about The Office, though, too, which is I think the American Office, especially in the later seasons, it gets inconsistent. There is a
yeah,
balance of
sure,
sentimentality that is needed. And the thing about The Office is that philosophically, it is ultimately a nihilistic show, right? Like, based on what I'm describing, you might be able to tell. One of the really interesting characters in it is Toby, what the guy that Michael always hates. The famous scene is I hate everything about who you choose to be, and he sees him and he goes, no, no. And the joke is that Toby is like so nice as to be incredibly bland. So why does Michael hate Toby? That's an interesting question. Well, Toby works for HR. Toby represents corporate and corporate interests. He is not a part of who Michael views as the family of the office. Therefore, Michael hates him. It's not just random. Like, there is actually a reason for it. This is why Michael doesn't tell him, I hate you. He very specifically says, I hate all the things you choose to be. Right? Like, he sees what Toby is doing as a choice. Now, what's interesting
right.
about Toby is when you learn his backstory, which is that he used to be a priest, but left the priesthood for a woman who then divorced him. And in the one scene, the only scene we ever see where Toby grapples with this, he walks into a church, looks at the cross, and says, why do you have to be so mean? And that's it. That's the entire joke. Now, it is funny, but I think it's really telling of like the philosophy of The Office. This is what happens to people who try to serve God. This is their lot in life. It's where they end up. And I think that is part of the humor of The Office. The fact that everybody ends up in a good place at the end, I think is kind of wrong, honestly. It's sentimental. You want to see it. But I think it should have ended on more of a pathos note where everybody is just kind of stuck where they are, right? Because that's the point of the show, isn't it? You can't really grow. And yet you have to grow for TV, a long form television series, unless you're doing an Always Sunny thing.
Right. And there's something to honesty about comedy that all the best comedy has. People deserve to be thrown down or whatever. People deserve having a pie thrown in their face.
You probably grasped this when I was talking about Seinfeld. You might have grasped this, that I was going into, I don't think you necessarily need to be like good natured to be funny, because I find Seinfeld funny.
Yeah.
So why is it funny? Like, we didn't really discuss that. Well, what's funny is that in the later seasons, it's in absurdity. And the reason absurdity is funny is in the contrast with the mundane. But in the earlier seasons and the more famous episodes, the reason that Seinfeld is funny is because there is an honesty to it. Now, the overall view of the world isn't accurate, but the individual events that they are making fun of are relatable enough that you recognize it as real. That's why it's funny.
Yeah.
Same with The Office. One of the things in The Office is, if you ever see someone go, Michael is too incompetent, it would never fly, you will get another dozen comments of people going, that's absolutely not true. He 100% would. I know a guy like that.
Yep.
Like, there is an honesty to the world of The Office. Does that mean that the overall philosophical worldview of the Office is ultimately accurate? No, but the viewer needs to be able to recognize something truthful in what they're seeing, or it isn't funny.
Right. And that's yeah, that's a very true statement. The Well, another thing of sort of comedy is that with absurdity especially, if it's just like a random event happening to somebody, maybe it's funny because of the shock. but it's not necessarily funny
Yeah,
from a long term perspective. Like there's
the
scenes in
Naked Gun movies, I think, are good examples of this. Like, there is one, I only watched it like once years ago, but I remember watching a clip later, and I laughed, but the joke is very shallow. Like, the joke was that he was making out with a woman, and he goes, and then they cut away for a moment, like, they're going to bed, and he goes, of course, we use protection. And then they zoom back, and they're both wearing hazmat suits making out. Now, why is this funny? Like, we're going to ruin the joke by explaining it. It's funny because it's completely absurd, and you didn't expect it.
yeah.
Is there any other reason it's funny? Does it hit a note of truth? None whatsoever, right? It is only funny because you did not expect to see it. And I laughed, and I remembered the joke. But this is not comedy that can, like, define error. It's never going to make a long-form television series, right?
Yes.
It would die too quickly. Dan Versus is a good example. It has a lot of absurd humor, but the absurd humor is grounded in character dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know Dan Versus, right?
Dan versus the World. It's great.
Yeah, excellent show. Probably my favorite adult cartoon. Yes, it is an adult cartoon. It was created and conceived of as an adult cartoon.
It's an adult cartoon. But
yeah.
So it's
an adult cartoon.
It's funny because
Maybe my favorite. Well, no, Futurama's funnier, but
sure. There's
Go ahead.
Thank you. Dan versus is very funny. Other animated comedy shows. There's things like Konosuba for anime, Pinky and the Brain, and Animaniacs for good Animaniacs from way back when I was a child.
Right, the real
Animaniacs. A bunch of other stuff, out there. And with a lot of it, the best ones I remember anyway, often set up a character, quote unquote, against the world. Dan versus Pinky and the Brain try to conquer the world every night. The Animaniacs are against the Warner Brothers studio, apparently. All these other things like that. Konosuba is against the world itself and their own stupidity. You have these characters versus it. Dan versus, the joke that's so good is that you have Tara Strong voicing this absolutely gorgeous bombshell, walking up to him, and he goes, I don't care who the government sends. I'm not paying taxes.
Right. The absurdity of Dan versus is, it's a very absurd show. However, it is grounded in truth. In fact, in some of the same truth as Seinfeld, though with a lot less mean-spiritedness. So, because Dan versus is about, he has some sort of petty grievance.
Yeah. And
the grievance is understandable. And Dan is generally right almost every time. Like one of the favorite jokes, the first episode is honestly a banger. Someone scratches Dan's car, right? And Dan decides he's going to get revenge on whoever scratched his car, and he learns it was a werewolf. So him and Chris, who he drags into the adventure, go on a hunt for the werewolf that scratched his car. Now, is this absurd? It's completely ludicrous. However, do you relate to Dan on a base level? Like, you're probably not thinking of this. It almost seems absurd to explain it. But yeah, you are, right? Like, you do relate to Dan. Because if somebody's just scratched your car and left, don't you just wish that you can hunt them down?
Every day.
Yeah, you do. Exactly. If someone scratches your car and just leaves, you are pissed as hell. You're not actually going to do it, but Dan will.
Yep.
And then in one of the best jokes of the entire show, at the end of it, he finds the werewolf, and then he walks over and he scratches the dude's car. And then he goes, all right, we're done. And then Chris goes, wait, what? That's it? He goes, wow. Like, he goes, what did you think I was going to do? He goes, I don't know, kill him or something? He's a werewolf. And then Dan looks at him and goes, kill him? Are you crazy? All he did was key my car. He's like, why would I kill him? It's like,
yes.
You mean I melted down my grandmother's silver just so you could key his car? Want to get burgers? And then he's like, yeah, sure. It's an incredible joke. It also, by the way, is what makes Dan kind of likable. Like, he has a weird sense of justice about things as well. You know, the episode where he goes to anger management because he was going to nuke the world because he was annoyed at squirrels besides.
Yeah.
But that was a one-off gag at the beginning of the episode, so yeah, not quite the same thing.
So hold on. The best joke in King of the Hill was Hank has to go to anger management classes for whatever, I forget what. I think he yelled at Dale or something, deservedly. And so he has to go to anger management classes. At the end of it, he gets his diploma, and the anger management course teacher tweaks him one last time, to see if he'll do it, to see if he'll snap. And he goes, "No, I'm gonna walk out of here." He had a dramatic moment where he saw somebody like have a heart attack because of their wrath. All these other things. But then there's Chuck Mangione in the back of the class, who's called up because he was starting fights in his giant Walmart-like warehouse, and he he looks at it. "Oh, you misspelled my name there." Then he picks up his trumpet and just beats the anger management guy, just like goes wham, and walks off.
That's incredible.
It's great. There's like Dan versus is really good. There's one where he's like the Phantom of the Opera that's pretty funny, and there's like three witches running the soundboard who like foretell the episode ahead of time because I can't remember. I think he got like food poisoning at their dine-in mystery theater or something. And so, but there's also things like American Dad, and you talking about werewolves brings this up, where Stan is trying to impress a senator so he gets a plum job at the CIA because he works for the CIA. And Steve is going to be the one who befriends his daughter. This is one of the best episodes in the whole thing. Jokes a minute. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm going to ruin it for you, Dad, because you're ruining my life. And by the way, the school had asbestos." And the response from Principal Lewis, who is insane, is, "I don't see how asbestos could be bad for your children. It's got best in the name." And then this guy goes, "There's a cut in my suit." And Lewis pushes him down, and he goes, "Oh, don't get near me. There's no reason we both gotta die." Stuff like that. And then Steve goes, "Yeah, I'm gonna be dog boy. I'm gonna drool. I'm gonna howl. I'm gonna go. Arr! I'm gonna do that in front of everybody. I'm gonna go. Arr! It says like, "No, don't do it." And Steve just starts howling, and all of a sudden, Van Helsing breaks through the window, and he goes, "Die, werewolf!" "Oh, hold on, I was just pretending to be a wolf." "Oh, so you're not really a werewolf?" "No, man. I do a very serious job, and we thank you for your service." Oh, that's great.
That is a weird one because I think it's between every two of three or every episodes. But episodes that I just unfunny.
Yeah.
Roger is the most hit and miss character for me because like about 50-50 if I find him
Excuse me. Yeah.
extremely hilarious. And it's no in between.
Oh, yeah.
Like I never just that was okay, or like hate it, or it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Part of the problem I think is that I think American Dad's political and religious humor is not good. Like, and I understand like, it's just because it's not your humor. It's just really, really, really on the nose, and it's very on the nose and very clumsy and very lame. But some of the character-based humor can be very funny, and that's the other thing too. Like I have said, I'm going to bring this up now because I think it's a good segue. I've said this for years, and to shock of some people, seasons 1 through 3 of SpongeBob is some of the best comedy writing ever. Every single episode of those first 3 seasons is insanely quotable. Some of them are just absolute like dynamite classics that I can rewatch to this day. Do you know anything about, first off, classic SpongeBob or no? Besides, like, I know you know the basics, everybody does, but like,
I'm
do you
gonna warn
know
you
the
right
show?
now. I actually find SpongeBob very unpleasant.
That's fair, but I would argue the first 3 seasons are great. So there's an episode that's a great example of this. Band Geeks, probably the most famous episode of the show because it gave us the Sweet Victory song that everybody was talking about for a while. Uh, if you know it, like they would talk about it before the Super Bowl that they should play it when Steven Hillenburg died or whatever. All right, so what is the episode Band Geeks? Squidward, the loser of the show, right? His rival Squilliam has a band. Squidward is jealous, so he lies to Squilliam that not only does he have a band, their band is going to play the Bubble Bowl. So Squilliam goes, "Oh, I'd love to see this." So Squidward puts up advertisements all over town saying, "Join my band." And of course, the whole cast of Bikini Bottom shows up. They have a lot of great one-off gags in this moment with everybody seeing the flyer and joining for different reasons. It's all character-based humor. That's what makes it good. It's very absurd, but like, for example, they cut to Mr. Krabs as they're reading the ad. And what does Mr. Krabs zoom on? He's the greedy one. He says, not to mention free refreshments. And it's a great one-off character-based joke. Well, they go to the band. That's where you get some of the famous lines where Patrick goes, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" "No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument." It's full of one-liners, but the one-liners are all very specific to the characters. You could not take a line from one character and give it to another and have it work the same. It doesn't work. Like Squidward goes, "I have an idea." This is later. They've already tried various things that have all failed in humorous ways to train the band. People act loud when they want to sound smart, right? And Plankton, who is very tiny, but also thinks he's a genius, yells, "Correct!" Nobody else could have given that line. It had to be Plankton. And then Squidward says, "Maybe we should play so loud people think we're good." And a 1, 2, and of course they blow out the windows. And then Squidward goes, "Okay, new theory. Maybe we should play so softly no one can hear us." Incredible sequence, incredible joke. All the way up to the end when Squidward leaves and SpongeBob gives a speech. And the speech, A, could only have been given by SpongeBob, and B, is perfectly in character for Squidward. What does he say? He says, "What kind of monsters are we? Squidward was always there for us when it was convenient for him." And then he gives the whole thing where he goes, when your little Jimmy was stuck in a fire, who rescued him? A fireman. Right. Now, if we all just pretend Squidward is a fireman, then we can band together and be a marching band. And then one guy in the back yells, "For the firemen." And they all cheer and start training. It's incredible. But the humor works, as absurd as it gets, is that it's specific to the characters. The characters in SpongeBob are very simple, but have very defined personalities. And it's not always the same joke every time. The joke builds off the characters. In the early seasons, there's this thing going on where you kind of can't tell the way an episode's going to go. Like, there's no real right or wrong. They're just acting the way that they act. Like the pizza delivery episode. They need to deliver a Krusty Krab pizza. SpongeBob is super enthusiastic about it. Squidward hates that he has to do it. So who was right? Well, in the later episodes, Squidward would be wrong and SpongeBob would be right. But in the good episodes, sometimes Squidward is right. Like when they're lost in the desert and he's trying to get SpongeBob to eat the pizza and SpongeBob refuses for the customer. Sometimes SpongeBob is right. Like when SpongeBob recommends where they go and Squidward doesn't listen to him just to be spiteful. And SpongeBob was right. But it's not it's not just one or the other. It's built off of the characters, and who was right simply depends on whose perspective would in fact be correct in that moment. That's good character writing. Early SpongeBob had excellent character writing, and even though the comedy was absurd, It was absurdist comedy built off of good characters. And I think that's also what's going on in Dan Versus and why Dan Versus works. It's absurdist comedy, but it's absurdist comedy built off of very well-defined characters. Who is right and who is wrong is not predetermined. Sometimes Dan's perspective is correct. Sometimes it's unreasonable. Sometimes Elise is correct. Sometimes it turns out that it's Dan. Sometimes Chris is right. Sometimes he's just too much of a doormat this time around. American Dad, in its good episodes, does excellent character-based humor. Like Roger going, look to your left, look to your right. 2 out of 3, and you go, in 20, by the end of this week, 2 out of 3 of you will be dead when they're in clown school. That's a very Roger thing to say.
Hand.
It's why it's, by your own hand. Great. That's a very Roger thing to say. That's why it's funny. You couldn't have given that line to Steve. If you gave that line to Steve, unless you established some reason why Steve lost his mind, then it could be funny. But
no, hold on.
It needs to be Roger who says it.
So Steve goes to clown college.
Yes, please do.
Steve goes to clown college, and he starts talking up, man, this instructor, and by the way, this is based on jokes that have happened in earlier seasons and episodes, because they actually have a pretty good setup on their running gags, where he goes, yeah, this is the hardest, toughest clown instructor in all of clowndom, and it's Roger, isn't it? I bet it's Roger. And Roger walks in dressed up like J.K. Simmons from that one movie where he's the band instructor, Whiplash, which is apparently Vivek Ramaswamy's children's favorite movie that he makes them watch, which I will never, ever forget because that is inherently hilarious that they're like 8 years old.
Unbelievably fucked up, but
and he makes
for him.
I don't think he actually does it. I think they watch like Arthur or something, like, I don't know. But anyway, point is, he's dressed up like J.K. Simmons from Whiplash. And
yes,
he goes, all right, you clowns, look to your left, look to your right. 2 out of 3 of you will be dead by your own hands before this year's up. And those who make it through will be clowns.
That's so good. Okay, I actually legitimately have to leave because I got home and I'm sitting in my car in the rain. So, Ben, make your point. Make your point.
That is my point.
Cool.
So, here's my
final
favorite.
Point.
Here's my favorite piece. Yeah, that's right. I lied, Anthony. I lied. Instead, I'm going to interrupt you. So one of my favorite jokes is to actually portray something incredibly serious and then portray something as something ridiculous. The best example that I've done recently, and I do this all throughout Pinkerton's Ghosts, is I have this cat reminisce on, the dog-eat-dog world, pardon the expression to all the cat lovers out there.
Yeah, the dog-eat-dog nature of reality and how life's constant struggle.
And then Jack goes, oh, do you want your little hat? Yes, I would like my little hat. It's like one of those things where I've spent multiple paragraphs building something that's actually quite dramatic and pays off later in the story, where he goes like, will the lion ever lie down with the lamb? And then it's like, yeah, but do you need your little hat? Yeah, I think I do. All right. That's my favorite type of written humor.
I would tend to agree. I'm reading Arsène Lupin versus Sherlock Holmes, which was an early Sherlock Holmes pastiche. First off, by the way, this is apropos of nothing. This is the last thing I'm gonna say before I go in. This point on Arsène Lupin. Apropos of nothing, I recommend Arsène Lupin, and if you read it, it's kind of wild just how Lupin III it really is. Like, I'm reading it going, damn, like, I didn't realize that Lupin III really did just take their character wholesale from Arsène Lupin. Like, obviously, they go, oh, he's the grandson, but like literally the sense of humor is the same. The way that they talk about Lupin is the same. I don't know how to describe it except you need to read it and you'll get what I mean. It has the vibe of Lupin III. That's number one. Number two is Arsène Lupin versus Sherlock Holmes is very funny. And it's a lot of character-based humor. Like, Lupin really wants a particular writing desk. Now, part of the point of Arsène Lupin is that he's a gentleman thief, and he was willing to be fair. He wants to. Originally, he offers to trade the desk that this dude bought for an actually better desk because he just wants this particular desk for some reason, right? And the guy is an asshole and just says no. Just leave me alone. I got it as a gift. He goes, but this one's better. So Lupin steals it, right? And then it comes out later that a lottery ticket in the desk would in fact that the guy had purchased would in fact have won the lottery. And the guy who owns the desk is convinced that somehow Lupin knew, even though this is impossible because the lottery numbers hadn't been drawn yet. And Lupin decides that he's willing to split the profits of the lottery 50-50 if the guy agrees, right? And the guy goes, no, never, I won't do it. And he tries to take it to court and whatever. And Lupin just goes, really? You're going to take it to court? Okay. And Lupin just goes to court with him and goes like, yeah. He goes, can he prove it was his lottery ticket? Goes, well, I have a letter saying it was mine. He goes, oh, that's interesting. I actually have the ticket. So I guess we're at an impasse. It's pretty funny. And then finally, in order to get the guy to give in, his daughter is kidnapped. Now, this is crossing a moral line, right? Like, normally speaking. And you go, okay, fine, I agree, I'll do it. Of course, you could probably guess by now, the reveal is that the daughter was not, in fact, kidnapped at all. She was being stifled by her oppressive father, and Lupin had sent her on a European vacation with her beloved cousin Philippe, who she wants to marry. And she was actually here now. And they were going to talk to their father, and Lupin is going to is helping to arrange a marriage and resolve tension. And also, he's willing to split the money with the dude, too. Like, he goes, to be honest with you, I didn't even want the ticket. I just wanted the desk. And then I don't know why yet. I'm not done with the book. But he's like, I just wanted the desk, but there happened to be a lottery ticket in there. He's like, and it won. What are the chances? It's all very funny. It's all character-based humor. You know, you have this pompous guy who's being kind of a dick, Lupin, not really taking anything seriously, toying with the law while the law is desperate to catch him. Very Lupin the Third, right? Good book, recommended. Final theory of comedy, it needs to be based in some sort of truth, and it needs to pointing out in some way it's about the absurdity of the real world and pointing that out. And it needs to be done with a certain inflection, and when you do it with the correct inflection, that's comedy. All right, gotta go.
Thank you, Anthony.
That's all, folks.
And thank you guys for joining us while we talked about comedy and stuff like that. Be sure to check out next week. We'll probably do an Easter stream the week before Easter. Easter's on the 12th this year. He's already gone. Oh, excuse me. I miss him already. Bye.